Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Dee Dee and the entire Schilt family, welcome to this celebration of life of our dear brother, Nathan Schilt. And on behalf of the University Church and the pastoral staff, we'd also like to welcome you and thank the family for including us into this very tender moment of your family's journey. While we celebrate this wonderful man today, we also mourn with every person feeling loss. It is deep and it hurts. I know as we reflect on his life, his amazing life, we will learn things about Nate we didn't know before. I feel that that serves to bring us together. Nate's bringing us together, and we will learn together about this amazing man. I got to have some incredible moments with him over the years. I don't mean to pretend that we were closer than anyone else in the room, but the moments we shared were very special. My favorite time were our quiet lunches. We would catch up on everything. We would talk about family, investments, healthcare, church, politics, music, and our shared past. I thought I knew him, but now I've learned a lot more through Dee Dee. First, he would start out these lunches by getting very personal. He'd say something outrageous and complimentary, right to my face. He made me feel special. He made me like myself. And when I would walk away from the lunch, I would just go, what is it about him? I just like that guy. It's because he'd always redirect the conversation to me. He was kind and thoughtful and deep. He was such a free and independent spirit, even a risk taker, I might add, always, though, with his bride at his side. He was such a liver of life. I didn't know his culinary pursuits. I didn't know that he had so many children around him all the time. And I didn't know his private charity, his generosity that nobody knew about throughout his entire life. But I knew how he was generous with me and how kind he was. I can say that whatever is said today about this guy being an amazing man, it is true. Even as a friend, he would call me out to consider a different perspective. I loved the prominence and the priority he placed on community and tradition. It has an adhesive quality. Tradition in church, tradition in worship, in music, in community, in politics, and in family. Tradition is important, he would say. So that's why we're here this afternoon. We are celebrating our brother's life, as is our tradition.
I am honored and, in all honesty, more than overwhelmed with the opportunity to present Nate's life sketch. And my attempt here feels wholly inadequate given the reality that it would take books to do him justice. Nate was never ordinary. That was evident from the start. He entered this world in Baghdad, Iraq, June 9th, 1948. He was the fifth in the family. I was the baby of the family and sixth. And I remember our older brother, Eric, would always talk to Mom, referring to us as the little boys because we were always together. His need to master things and do things right was evident in his earliest years. Mom often told the story of being somewhat worried about Nathan in those earliest years because he hadn't talked at 2.5. Then one day, Mom was moving a dining room chair, and Nate was on the other end hanging on. And a bit of a tug-of-war ensued, and suddenly, to Mom's amazement, Nate looked at her and with clear enunciation said his first words, "No, I need it." That was indicative of Nate's approach to life, wanting to master things correctly and skip the baby talk, never satisfied with just getting by. In any endeavor, that included everything from mastering spiritual concepts to making the perfect homemade ice cream. He spent most of his childhood in Denver, Colorado. We lived in you might say, kind of an Adventist ghetto where the church, the Adventist hospital we worked at, and the church school were all within about a 5-block radius. He attended Mile High Academy and graduated in 1965. Nate was extremely dedicated and driven in whatever he chose. I used to kind of blame him for cutting my pursuit of piano short. I had kind of been pushed somewhat less than enthusiastic to take about 3 years of lessons. When I was 11, Nate decided to pick up piano. Unlike me, he was a serious student. When he surpassed me in a year, I quit. But Nathan was a wonderful older brother. We had occasional conflicts, but when I look at other siblings, I know how fortunate I was to have him. Mom wisely chose to have no TV with us growing up, even though we certainly lamented it. We later found it to be a wonderful gift she gave. Even without that, Nate and I found ourselves spending hours entertaining together, from squirt gun fights to tending our aquariums to hamsters to the hamster babies to playing board games and slot car demolition derbies. Nate taught me chess, which has been a sheer pleasure for me throughout my life. It's amazing how in our play we stayed so busy with no video entertainment. Nate shared with us his appreciation, our appreciation for Mom and her tremendous self-discipline and sacrifice as a single parent. He often recalled the time he walked by her room and noticed her kneeling in prayer. About 20 minutes later, he walked by and she was still kneeling, having him wonder whether she was praying or had fallen asleep. That was a reasonable question, since she worked nights as a nurse and only slept about 5 hours daily in terms of tending to our needs. We knew we were a major subject of her prayer, and we certainly needed it. As kids, we sometimes resented her unwavering commitment to an emphasis on faith. However, as an adult, Nate often reflected with appreciation on Mom's priority, and at her 90th birthday celebration, he expressed his deep gratitude over the God-centered home she had provided, with the comfort of morning and evening worship, passing on a legacy of faith that served him well both in his family and his own life. Nate was also a standout in sports, which was a testimony to his drive, since it was never encouraged in our family. None of the rest of us were much into sports, but he excelled, and he was always pushing me to play baseball and football with him. I wasn't always excited about it, but he always got me to do it because he knew I wanted to be with him. And he was a fierce competitor in tennis throughout much of his adulthood. One sport we both loved was snow skiing. Unfortunately, we did not have the financial resources to support that as much as we would have liked. It was a far cry from his adult years when he was an expert skier at Mammoth. Back then, as teens, we would get up early in the morning and get to Winter Park Recreation Center the first thing, buy tickets, lift tickets for $5, but that was a bit steep for us, so we stuck our tickets on with wax paper for easy removal. Then we were the first people on the chairlift and would ski our hearts out until about noon. 12:30, we'd go down to the parking lot and sell our tickets for $2.50 while the booth was selling them for $3.50. We thought it was a great deal, and we learned to economize early in life. His first job was delivering papers, and I later joined him with us tossing papers from our bicycles. By age 14, he was working at the Porter Adventist Hospital in pots and pans, and gradually moved up to be assistant to the head cook there. He attended Union College and graduated with a bachelor's degree in history. He loved history and philosophy, spending hours in discussions with his professors. I'm sure they were more than amazed by his intellect and command of some knowledge that was not typical for most of their students. His professors wisely advised him that he needed to pursue law and keep history and philosophy as his hobbies, which he did. Nate did well in school, but never had the outstanding grades he was capable of attaining. That's because grades weren't that important to him. He was much more interested in the unending pursuit of knowledge. I always admired the fact that he never worried about impressing others. He was impressive without trying. He always seemed so confident and self-assured, inspiring the well-deserved confidence of others. Growing up, we all knew that Nathan was brilliant and had a photographic memory. Mom used to read to us hours on end, including some of the classics. Amazingly, as an adult, Nate would quote some of those passages she had read years before. He loved words, reading, and word games, which were not always thrilling to play with him because he almost always won. In free time, we occasionally caught him simply reading the dictionary. His vocabulary was amazing, and not infrequently, I had to look up words in our email exchanges. I suspect that his respectable grades did not get him into UCLA Law School, but with his insatiable appetite for knowledge and his vocabulary, he aced the graduate record exams, and that was his ticket in. In law school, he continued to pursue knowledge over grades. I was just beginning medical school as he was finishing law school, and I remember him talking about the grades and how it went, and it had me wondering why I was gunning for a certain place in my medical school class, because Nathan wasn't hyper about it at all. He talked about their grading system. It was HP, high pass, P for pass, or F for fail. Nate used to say, "I peed my way through law school." And only Nate would describe law school as a breeze. In fact, he spoke with fondness about mastering the game of bridge while he was in school. Though he certainly wasn't into grades, he enjoyed the lifelong adventure of learning and used to say that if he could get paid to go to school, he would do it the rest of his life. Of course, with his gifted intellect, he was a constant learner in any setting. And as we were talking, I remember my son Justin talking about how impressed he was, and I'm like, I don't know how Nathan got into that. My son plays the violin, and he was talking to him about periods of classical music and Baroque and all that. Nathan knew the whole thing, and Justin was quite amazed. I mean, he just was so rounded and knew everything about everything. Not surprisingly, he passed the bar without difficulty. Briefly, he worked at a private firm, but he said he preferred being responsible for his own work rather than supervising new attorneys, which was always involved with a partner. He switched to the prosecutor's office at San Bernardino County, and in short order, rose to become the chief deputy DA, supervising over 20 other attorneys. In 1990, the Zipprick law firm with Bob and Bill Zipprick and Carrie Heinrich spotted Nate's expertise and talked him into joining their firm in the role of medical legal defense for Loma Linda University Medical Center. He served in that role as a formidable advocate for the next 33 years. I've heard stories of his command and success in the courtroom, and one of my deepest regrets is I was never able to see him in action. However, I'm certain there are many providers feeling enormous gratitude for having such a dedicated, excellent representation on their side. I also remember him commenting on that move, saying, "I loved working with Bob, Bill, and Carrie, and loved defending Loma Linda, but the best gift of that move was being introduced to Dee Dee, Carrie's sister-in-law. She became the love of my life, and along with our kids, the best part of my life. And indeed, his family was everything to him. He treasured his love with Dee Dee and their children and grandchildren. And our conversations together were often replete with stories of adventures with Dee Dee and delight and pride in their kids and grandkids." Nate was the smartest person I've ever known, but that in and of itself was simply a gift he received, and I wished I had it. What was so impressive was how he chose to capitalize on it, never taking it for granted, always growing in knowledge, always using it to give back. It seemed like with every conversation we had, I always learned something new, leaving every interaction feeling like a gift. His intellectual prowess, knowledge base, and debate skills made him persuasive and formidable in standing up for conservative libertarian principles he believed in. And he always spoke the truth, regardless of whether it was popular or politically correct. His positions frequently left the opposition defenseless, and I'm sure sometimes speechless. I already miss the joy from those stimulating conversations and his amazing novel take on everything, including politics, philosophy, relationships, and faith. And I'm sure Nate would say that his most important endeavor in life was his journey of faith. His love for God was deep, consistent, abiding, and ever-growing. He had such a wonderful, novel way of looking at spiritual concepts. All who knew him will miss those inspiring conversations. Nate never took life for granted, never took his love for granted. In his last few days, he was continually blowing kisses to Dee Dee. And in his last breaths, Nate would say he was blessed beyond belief, felt nothing but gratitude for how God had led. Nate's deep love for family and friends, gifted intellect, and unparalleled trust in God leaves a painful hole which none can fill. Truly, he was irreplaceable. And he was taken far too soon. But with such a presence and such a gift, I would always feel that way when he left. And our tears testify to this immense loss and what a gift we were given. I praise God for the privilege of having such an amazing and wonderful soul in my life, the priceless gift of my brother, Nate.
So, what was it like to have Nathan as a friend? You all have stories. Let me tell you some of mine. Nathan was the best. He became closer than a brother. In 1979, Jim and Priscilla Walters invited us to their home in Claremont for a Saturday night get-together with the Schilts. While playing a game with spoons, Nathan pounced when he realized I was attempting to grab the first spoon. Our hands collided. I was startled to see the back of my right hand bleeding profusely with several large cuts. Scars remain to this day. On the way home that night, Anita rightly predicted that we would become close friends, blood brothers. I quickly realized we had much in common. Nathan had two beautiful daughters, Karen and Kim, who were close in age to our Rachel and Bonnie Jean. 3 months following the birth of Eric, the next year, Anita and I asked Nathan if we could name our new son after him. Nathan, a beautiful name, meaning gift. Nate became Big Nathan in our family, and our son, Little Nathan. Both have been precious gifts to us. Big Nathan was an amazing athlete, blessed with fast reflexes and outstanding hand-eye coordination. He loved competing. You had to earn a victory when playing against him. I never saw him throw a game. He was an outstanding tennis player, playing aggressively with an attacking serve and volley strategy. I recall that he won several local tournaments in the early 1980s. I was often his sparring partner, but never got close to his level of play. Of course, he was always gracious as he cleaned my clock. Nathan told me of his experiences in physical education at Denver's Mile High Academy. His PE teacher, Jim Perry, stressed the importance of learning individual sports that he could play on into adulthood. Nathan said he played table tennis almost daily while at Union College and frequently at UCLA. I remember incredible professional-level table tennis matches at our home in Claremont between Bart Vaughn and Nathan. Rallies seemed to go on forever. Nate always attacking with one slam after another, Bart on defense, often 10 to 15 feet from the table. Apparently I'm wrong on this next statement, but to my knowledge anyway, Nathan's first trip outside the United States was our buddy ski adventure to the Alps in February of 1985. He had a limited alpine skiing background at that time, but could manage to get down most runs. The snowfall that year in Europe was awful, with many major resorts closed. Fortunately, we had a rented car with no specific resort reservations. After snow disappointments in Innsbruck and northern Italy, the decision was made to go to the roof of Europe, Chamonix, France, where we hoped to find snow. When we arrived, we were again disappointed to find almost no snow in the city. Undeterred, we rode up the famous Argyle du Midi, the highest vertical ascent cable car in the world, which has an altitude gain of 9,200 feet and arrives to an altitude of 12,605 feet. Unloading, we noticed gaps in the ancient wood flooring of the landing platform, showing plenty of daylight below. There was limited signage, and we appeared to be the only skiers, which was yet another warning sign. Throughout the day, we heard and saw all too frequent avalanches. To get to the glacier and ski down the 14.3-mile Vallée Blanc run, we had to walk through a rock and ice tunnel which opened onto a narrow, 1-foot-wide ridge, approximately 75 yards long. There were steep cliffs on either side with only a single, poorly anchored rope to hang on to. Clearly, Europe has different safety standards than we were used to. I gingerly made my way across. Our third companion made it by crawling the last few yards before throwing himself on the landing area and not moving. I was shocked when I looked back and saw Nathan nonchalantly walking across the ridge, ski boots on, skis over his shoulder, fully relaxed, taking his own sweet time. He was enjoying the view and stopping frequently to look over the edge. He was unfazed. I had never seen anything this dangerous. We spent the next 4 hours slowly navigating our way down. With our guardian angels close beside us, we avoided large crevasses. When we made it to the valley floor, we collapsed in exhaustion, grateful for divine protection. Not wanting to let good money go to waste, the next day we drove to central Switzerland with the goal of skiing the Schilthorn, made famous in the James Bond movie In Her Majesty's Secret Service. We had to race out of the iconic revolving mountaintop restaurant as the weather suddenly deteriorated. In dense fog, Nathan led us safely down the mountain. It became clear once again that Big Nathan had no fear of heights and felt at home in high alpine settings. Nathan was multi-talented. In addition to sports, he loved singing. Early on, he started taking lessons with Frank Tavallone and continued to do so on and off for 30-plus years. North Hills Church was blessed with many exceptional singers, but in my opinion, it was the tenor section that made the biggest difference, led by dramatic tenor Nathan and lyric tenor Bart Vaughn. While conducting, I would often look at Nathan. His eyes were responsive, intense, and thoughtful. He had a world-class sound. He sang with confidence and commitment. With Nathan's leadership and many outstanding singers, the choir often sounded like a smaller version of the LA Master Chorale. Nathan sang to praise God. As a friend, Nate was kind, loyal, trustworthy, and courageous. We often sought each other's counsel both in good and difficult times. We celebrated good fortune. I was thrilled when Nathan, with Bill Zipprich's encouragement, made the decision to move from the LA County DA's office to Loma Linda to use his talents to defend physicians, hospital, and staff. In the late 1980s, when he started dating, he would bring various dates to our home. Anita would signal, no, no, and no. Then Dee Dee Shearer appeared. Anita whispered to me, "My work here is done." It has been priceless to us to see our dear friend so loved for 30 years. Thank you, Dee Dee. Anita and I spent the last week in February staying with Nathan and Dee Dee. It was special to drive Nathan to several of his proton beam appointments. On the drive back from San Diego that Friday, Nathan, who had dozed off, woke up suddenly and wanted to tell me about the highlights of his life. First was meeting and falling in love with Dee Dee. Next, his children and grandchildren. Thirdly, he was proud of the decades of work he had been able to do at Loma Linda. And touchingly, he said he felt honored that we had named our son after him. We spent our last Sabbath together in Yucaipa, snowed in. We listened to Pastor Randy Roberts, Nathan's favorite preacher. We watched tapes of their wedding and Nathan's concert with Bill Wallstrom from the early 90s. That night, as the girls talked, Nate and I watched Live Golf. In many ways, it felt like old times, with plenty of laughter and joking. The next day was the last time I saw Nathan. He was surrounded by all his loved ones, celebrating Sarah Schilt's birthday. Nathan was quietly sitting on the couch, smiling. He was at peace. As we left, Anita navigated her way past family members to give him a big hug. Nathan had a spirit of thankfulness, hope, faith, and courage as he faced very difficult end-of-life issues. I will miss you, Nathan. You will be one of the first I look for in heaven. I know you will laugh when I tell you that now I have an eternity to get my tennis game in shape, so you better bring your A game. May our friendship continue forever.
I worked with Nate for really 3 decades. More than 20 of those years were in a legal team here at Loma Linda. One of my first acts in 2000 after being named general counsel was to reach out to Nate and to Carrie Heinrich and to ask them to serve and continue to serve as they were in the team here. And it was probably my best decision. Nate and I were colleagues Colleagues is an interesting word. It means you're together in a common cause. And we certainly, in that sense, were colleagues. Dee Dee asked me to talk about Nate as an attorney. There is a real privilege that some have to pass the bar. Now, that's not exactly the exam. The bar is the wall between the spectators in a courtroom, the counsel tables, the judge on the bench, and the witness box. To be able to open that gate and walk in and sit down at the table and represent and advocate for your client is a real privilege. And that's what it means, really, to pass the bar. The exam is simply the last step in qualifying one to do that, but it's only the beginning of the story. All licensed attorneys who've passed the exam can probably do this, but only a few, very few, relatively speaking, preeminent lawyers can do that consistently again and again with confidence and with competence. And those aren't the same things. I've known incompetent, confident attorneys. That's not a pleasant thing. But Nate was both competent and confident. He was one of those. Excellent trial attorney. His brother has talked about how he became an attorney and the path through that, but over the years in the district attorney's office and representing Loma as our primary malpractice defense attorney for a self-insured trust, and many other things beyond that he did for us as a counselor at law, a term that's sometimes used for attorneys if it really belongs, and he was a counselor at law. He advised as well as advocated. He had hundreds of jury trials. I've had attorneys come out from large Los Angeles firms who were pitched to us to represent us on major cases here. And they were very proud of their career. And these would have senior status, and they'd have maybe 17 or 18 jury trials behind them. Nate had hundreds. He was very comfortable in a courtroom. I know that Nate loved to dive. He loved to scuba dive. He loved to snorkel. He loved to do things in the water, under the water. Well, the courtroom was water for Nate Schilt. He was comfortable there. There was so much more, though, than just his qualifications to Nate as an attorney. He had unblemished, unequivocal, really unqualified integrity. He was a man of his word. Adversaries, attorneys on the other side of cases knew this. Judges knew this. He was able to impress that credibility upon juries. He was believable because he was so authentic and so transparent that he had, I have never known, I guess I would put it that way, a colleague equal to him in integrity. He had a professional demeanor. Nate was always what you saw in private or in the courtroom or in depositions or whatever. He was always the same person, professional, calm, and always civil. He was courteous, he was polite, he was objective. He always saw the bigger principle, had a good sense of relevance, which all really great attorneys have to have, is what's relevant and what's not. He was courteous, he was kind to those who were unkind to him, which was one of the most radical things Jesus ever said, "Be ye kind, therefore, as your Father is kind," for he's kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Nate was kind. He was personable, but yet he was uncompromising. He managed that delicate balance of being likable and personable, but at the same time, he never compromised his principles, ever. Juries and judges liked him. as I mentioned. Opposing counsel liked him and respected him. And I have to say, in a long time, a career with Nate, I have never once heard a negative criticism of his demeanor, his style, his tactics, or his courtroom performance. That's a remarkable thing, because every day you go out, as a trial attorney, you go out with your shield and you come back with it or on it, as they say, as the Romans used to say. He was thoroughly prepared. He had an economy of effort. Nate didn't waste words. He had a full command, as has been mentioned here, of the English language, and beyond that, what most people ever have. You would not easily get into a word game with Nate, and all of his colleagues knew it. But he was sparing with them. Didn't say more than was necessary, didn't less than was necessary. He just got it said the way it was supposed to be. Always fearless in taking on a cause. Representing a faith-based institution like Loma, and with Carrie, they represented the conference here and things. Some of those are very controversial, both within the community and outside of the community. Nate was fearless about that. He never made himself the issue. He always championed the rule of law, that the system had to work, and he had to do his part in seeing that the system worked. But even then, there was so much more to Nate the attorney than this excellent reputation and record. Nate was, as has been mentioned, a devoted, and I mean every word here, a devoted follower of Jesus Christ. Psalm 116:5 says, "The Lord values the lives of his faithful servants. They are precious in his sight." Nate was a faithful servant. He was a committed, all-in follower of Christ. This rooted him in everything he was. As a colleague, as an attorney, as an advocate, as a father, all the good things about Nate were rooted back in that. And there are those who say that one cannot be, though if you've been grown up in this church and become an attorney, we all know this, that I've often been told you can't be a Christian and be a lawyer. We're kind of like the tax collectors in the gospel. Nate disproved this. Always thoroughly a Christian, always thoroughly a professional lawyer. As a legal team, we pray together. We share God's word together, mutually encourage each other in our Christian walk. We met all through the time that we've been together in that team. We would meet right up to the end, till Nate couldn't really come anymore, but into this year. He would come and participate. And he repeatedly told me over the years how much this meant to him, the prayer together, the talk of God, the talk of the Word, sharing ideas in this as a member of the team. It encouraged him, and he encouraged us. He talked about his experience, and his brother talked about Nate passing by their mother with open Bible on her knees, praying. That had a profound influence on him, and falling asleep while she did it. He had a wide and deep theological reading. His intellectual life, as in philosophy and history and in theology, informed his devotion to Christ. He was sacrificial in his education of his children, all of whom, and you're going to hear from them, understand after me, but all of whom are sincere, active Christians. He was very proud of that, and he would often talk to you about his children in our meetings, because he was proud of you, and he was proud of what you thought and what you stood for, and it influenced him, and through him influenced us. With Dee Dee, he also participated in transitional group homes for foster children, and they did a lot of this, both using their time, their funds, their things to do this. It made a profound difference in a lot of lives and continues to do that. Nate was loyal. He was no fair weather friend. As I said, you're often misunderstood representing a faith-based institution. And he'd always worked to put the institution in the best light here at Loma Linda. But if he felt we were less than something we should be in a legal sense, whether it was me or the senior leadership, I have known Nate to be forthright, quiet, never caused a fight, but forthright about what he thought and he believed was the right path to take. And he would do that again and again. Social media often attacks a place like this and the people in it. And I've had other representation besides here, and it drew its share of attacks. And I've tried to follow a practice not responding to that because it's very difficult to fight a battle in social media. You can't win because there's no rules and people can just keep coming. But many times, Nate came to my aid. Suddenly there'd be a comment in the comment sections, very well thought out, understanding of me, understanding of the institution being defended, that kind of thing. And he came through again and again, and I was always, and I told him this, grateful for it. He did that without being asked. He did that out of principle, and he did that out of friendship, and I appreciate it. And in one of our last conversations, he told me, I would rather die of cancer than ever let any harm come to Loma Linda. That was Nate. He was steadfast to the end. He carried his demanding workload and trial calendar into January of this year. And when finally he couldn't go to court anymore without the aid of Dee Dee and even stand there, he was just too weak. He called me one day, and he texted me and he called me, and very apologetically, he was very apologetic about it and responsibly said, I can't continue to go on. I need to transfer, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He kept saying like he was letting us down. And I said, no, Nate, you have fought the good fight, and you have stood in longer than, and he did so with skill. He didn't leave when he was weakened in his abilities in court. It was time. I add a word here for Dee Dee, who supported him through this time, and Chris Bartram, his longtime assistant, who also supported him. And you've set an example for all of us of faithfulness and love. It's been mentioned here that Nate was a towering intellect. He was a serious man. He had a great sense of humor, and we've laughed together many times, and he had a fine sense of irony. But you're not going to hear a lot of things about jokes at the expense of Nate here today, or others at the expense of Nate, because he was a genuine thing, a serious human being of thoughtfulness and conviction. He had informed convictions about faith and society, individual responsibility and freedom. He had a generosity of spirit, and he never took cheap shots or ever engaged in ad hominem attacks. Someone shared with me a couple of weeks ago this passage, and I read it here. The truly educated man, this is from an English philosopher, E.F. Schumacher. The truly educated man is not a man who knows a bit of everything. In fact, he may have little detailed knowledge of facts and theories, but he will be truly in touch with the center. He will not be in doubt about his basic convictions, about his view on the meaning and purpose of his life. He may not be able to explain these matters in words, but the conduct of his life will show a sureness of touch, which stems from his inner clarity. Well, that doesn't totally apply to Nate because he did have the knowledge and the grasp of the details, but he did have that inner clarity, and it imparted peace to him. And it imparted peace to his colleagues and those around him. The Apostle Paul said in Timothy 1:8, the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Pure heart, good conscience, and a sincere faith. That too was our Nate. Nate lived in faithfulness. The Lord values the lives of its faithful servants and counts them as precious. Nate's life was valuable and precious to God, and his life and example is valuable and precious to us. and it lives on in our hearts and our minds. We remember Nate the attorney, Nate the friend, with love and gratitude.
I wrote this poem for my papa. Nathan, papa, grandpa, loving, kind, strong, amazing, loved his family, friends, and God, who believed in his second life with God, who wanted the best for everyone around him, who used his big brain, heart, and words to help others, who gave many people a person they could talk to, love, and care for, who lived his life in gratitude. Romans 14:8 says, "If we live, then we live for the Lord, and if we die, then we die for the Lord. Therefore, whether we live or die, we always belong to the Lord."
Please bow our heads for prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you for being with us and Papa. I know you understand that we've been through a lot. I will miss him so much. My Papa was a great man. He was always such a kind and loving grandpa. He always made me and so many of us laugh. Every time I saw him, he had a huge smile and lifted me up and wrapped me in a big hug. So today, Jesus, I ask that you wrap us all up in one of Papa's big hugs. I pray that we all see him together in heaven soon. In Jesus' name, amen.
This poem is called Farewell, My Friends. It was beautiful, as long as it lasted. The journey of my life, I have no regrets whatsoever, save the pain I'll leave behind. Those dear hearts who love and care, and the heavy with sleep, ever moist eyes. The smile in spite of a lump in the throat, and the strings pulling at the heart and soul. The strong arms that held me up when my own strength let me down. Each morsel that I was fed with was full of love divine. At every turning of my life, I came across good friends. Friends who stood by me, even when the time raced by. Farewell, farewell, my friends. I smile and bid you goodbye. No, shed no tears, for I need them not. All I need is your smile. If you feel sad, think of me, for that's what I'd like. When you live in the hearts of those you love, remember then, you never die.
We grieve because we are part of one another, connected by the golden thread that binds us all. The absence of another is felt deeply within our souls. We are displaced when someone has departed. We don't feel right. We don't feel centered. Whenever life's flow is interrupted, the threads of our existence unravel. It is others in our life who weave us back together, making us whole and strong once again, as memories are recounted and shared. Thank you all for coming to help celebrate my grandpa today.
Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful.
But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on the law he meditates day and night.
He is like a tree planted by streams of water that brings forth its fruit in its season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper.
I'll miss him a lot.
I remember my dad saying on more than one occasion that he would have liked to have been a history teacher. Not that he had any regrets, that was definitely not his style. But he really was a great teacher. He didn't lecture me, he inspired me. He didn't just teach me skills and facts, he helped form my character. After my parents' divorce, we only saw my dad on weekends, and he always made the most of that time. We baked and made candy, we did puzzles, we listened to classical music, we read, we skied and played tennis, we went on road trips, we spent time outside, we kept the Sabbath and went to church regularly. There were so many small things that added up exponentially. He was cultivating in us a love of the true, the good, and the beautiful. He was training our habits and therefore our hearts. He didn't just teach us through activities. He taught us by being an example himself, by demonstrating discipline and mastery of his passions. One of the few explicit life lessons he often repeated to me was that I should not allow my emotions to control me. This infuriated me, which I know is ironic. But of course, he was absolutely right, and this advice continues to play in my head. I think I might be a little bit better at following it now than I used to be. The amazing thing is, he actually lived out this advice. He did not let things get to him. He was so safe and secure. In fact, I don't remember him ever losing his temper, except on the golf course. As a parent myself who has made brief and unsuccessful attempts to teach my own children to ski, one of the most frustrating experiences of my life, it is amazing to me now to remember that he taught us all to ski by himself and regularly took us skiing, keeping calm throughout all of my obnoxious whining and protesting. The example that he set for me in his own character continues to teach me to be a better person, even more than the advice he gave me. But the most important thing he taught me was his faith. He was not outspoken about it. He certainly never could have convinced me to believe the way he did, but he lived it. The best way I have of explaining his remarkable character was that it was evidence of the transforming power of the indwelling Holy Spirit and the resulting fruit in his own life: love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. One of the most important ways he taught me about faith was in his selfless love for me. He has always loved me unconditionally, even when I made bad choices. I know he must have been particularly concerned when I was seduced by cultural Marxism in graduate school. But he never let on that he was anything other than completely proud of me. He spent so much time talking to me and finally was instrumental in leading me out of my misguided ideas, very patiently, over a period of years of respectful debates, at least respectful on his side. I was so stubborn and self-righteous, and he was so wise and humble. I'm pretty sure no one else could have saved me from myself, and I'm so grateful that he was there for me. But as my choices became more aligned with his values, I felt closer to him and could finally truly appreciate his love for me. And this is another way he taught me about faith, that to be loved unconditionally and without reservation, even in my brokenness, instead of making me complacent, has inspired me to live in a way that is worthy of that love. I will carry with me the warm glow of being seen and loved by my dad, and although I will miss him every day, I will find comfort in knowing that this love is only a hint of the love that my Heavenly Father has for me, a foretaste of heaven. I would have loved to have another 20 years with my dad, but I know that it still wouldn't have been enough. It is because I miss him so much that he is teaching me, even now, a lesson that I know will help me face future suffering and loss. He is teaching me not to put my hope in the things of this world. I thought I was already doing this, But the verse from Matthew has new meaning for me now. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. When everyone I loved most was here with me on earth, this is where my heart was. So this is my dad's greatest lesson to me, the gift of hope for eternity. And I do not mean hope as a verb that is a synonym for wish. I mean hope the way that Tim Keller explains it being used in the New Testament. He says that the Greek word is better translated as a life-changing certainty about the future. So thanks to the lessons of my dad that will always continue to challenge and strengthen me, I am learning to fully fix my eyes on what is unseen and eternal, knowing that each day without him here brings me one day closer to being reunited with him.
When I was in high school, I remember getting a message every Valentine's Day to come to the office. I would get this beautiful bouquet of flowers from my dad. And in typical teenage fashion, I was mortified the flowers from my dad and not from a boy. Yet somewhere buried under the embarrassment was a sense of feeling loved, valued, and special. My dad never failed to make me feel special. He took a ridiculous amount of pride in even the most mediocre of my accomplishments and never made me feel bad about my failures. I must have disappointed him 100 times, but his love and support never wavered. He lifted me up and gave me all the tools I needed to have confidence and strength, to be better than I was aware I could be. As has already been said, my dad was so intelligent and wise. He always gave unbiased, sage advice that comforted and led me in the right direction. I knew without a doubt I could trust his guidance and wisdom. He was fiercely competitive and loved games, word games in particular, as my uncle talked about, probably because he dominated. He was like a walking dictionary. His command of the English language was unmatched. No one would even think to question the obscure, unheard of words he'd play in Scrabble. If he were a less honest person, we might have suspected he was cheating. Despite how mind-blowingly smart he was, his intelligence was humble and understated. I took so much pride in his strength of character and always strived to emulate him. He had a zest and gratitude for life that was infectious, even for the smallest things like a perfect batch of homemade fudge or his homemade ice cream, comfortable hammock chairs on the dock by the lake, my brother playing the guitar, family gathered around the table for dinner. My dad found so much joy in so many things and wanted nothing more than for everyone around him to share that joy. While it is impossible not to mourn and ache for my dad, I do want to celebrate the joyous, grateful life he led, the supportive, loving father he was, and the beautiful legacy he left for me, my brother and sister, and many grandchildren to carry on. Dad, because your strength, kindness, intelligence, and humble spirit live on in each and every one of us, I have no doubt that we are all incredibly special. Thank you for never, ever letting us forget that. And also, thank you for the flowers, just in case the ungrateful teenage version of me never said it. I am eternally grateful for your thoughtful, inspiring presence in my life, and will love you forever.
One of my first memories of Nate was back when I was in elementary school, and he and my mom had just started dating. We had gone over to his house, and he let us have ice cream for dinner, and we could watch an Indiana Jones movie. And these have been previously completely off the table. So I remember driving home and telling my mom, this one's a keeper. Like, keep him around. We want him. So when Nate married my mom, he brought many, many good things into our lives, like his love of desserts. I remember he made the best fudge and cherry cream cheese pie at Christmas, and would handpick boxes of these candies that had each family member's favorite candies in them. No summer was complete without his delicious homemade ice cream. He made the best chocolate chip cookies for us, and he continued to mail them to me when I went away to college and was feeling homesick. He loved sports, and he introduced me to the Lakers and the Dodgers. When I decided I wanted to play varsity sports, he taught me how to shoot a basketball and hit a tennis ball and catch a football, and he would spend hours with me practicing in the backyard. He filled our lives with music, from taking us to the symphony to singing hymns in his loud, booming voice that at first would be embarrassing to me in church because you could hear it all the way across on the other side of the church. But then, as I got older, it became very comforting. He'd lead out in family worship songs at home. His love for God and the importance of modeling Christian values was shown to us by his words and actions every day. He loved knowledge and debate, and he would smoke the competition when he played Trivial Pursuit. And then always excited to share the latest book he had read and about all the different things he was learning with us. In true attorney fashion, he loved to debate and would spend hours arguing a point just for fun. Just when the debate would get extra heated, he would stop and say, well, that was fun. Now let's all go out for ice cream. Everybody's kind of looking at each other like, what happened? He was passionate about his law practice and somehow managed to balance being a highly successful attorney with spending time with us, his family. He's one of the only people I've seen that has managed to get the work-life balance just about right. He was an amazing grandpa, and he taught my kids how to ski. He played hours of ping pong with them and had a ritual going for years where they would call each other with cheesy jokes. He knew how to make each kid and grandkid feel loved and important. And he brought so many good things into our lives, and we will continue to be reminded every day of the love he showed us and our happy memories together. We will miss you, Nate, very much. A Race Well Run by D.D. Schilt, with apologies to A.E. Houseman and Shakespeare. The times you won your town the race, we cheered you through the marketplace. Man and woman stood cheering by as home we brought you shoulder high. Today, on road the runners run, shoulder high we bring you still, but set you at this threshold down. Heaven is calling you from this town. Smart lad, to slip this world away from fields where glory does not stay, and sometimes, though the laurel grows, it withers quicker than a rose. Now eyes the shady night has shut, cannot see the record cut, masterful words, wisdom shared, his heart we knew by the path he walked. He walked with love. Is that not enough? Your home and hearth will always cheer, the husband, father, friend so dear. Now you will not swell that rout of men who wear earth's honors out. From heavenly hosts there comes the call, come, good and faithful servant, home. A life well lived, a race well run. The heavenly hosts hallelujahs sing, his fleet foot the call to hear, for throughout his life in him you lived. And now redemption lies within. For him, no longer the faded rose, for now we find round his laureled head the promised crown of life unfurled. To us you gave him for a time. He brought us great joy. We have loved him well.
You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not hopeless. Though you've been broken, your innocence stolen. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. And I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. There is no distance that cannot be covered over and over. You're not defenseless. I'll be your armor, I'll be your shelter. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. And I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. And I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. Well, I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear you whisper you have nothing left. But I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. And I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of your hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. Yeah, I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the coldest night. It's true, I will rescue you. And I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of your hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. Oh, I will rescue you.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken. So I hung my head and cried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
That knows no one but you. A love I never thought I'd find. A love that comes just once and never comes again. A love until the end of time.
dream of dreams really do come true. Ooh, someday you wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dream that you dare to, oh why can't I? Well, I see trees of green and red roses too. I'll watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Well, I see skies of blue and I see clouds of white and the brightness of day. I like the dark and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking and singing, how do you do? They really say, I love you. I hear babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than we'll know, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. And the dreams that you dare to, why, oh, why can't I?
I wanted you for life, you and me in the wind. I never thought there'd come a time that our story would end. It's hard to understand, but I guess I'll have to try. It's not easy to say goodbye. For all the joy we shared, all that time we had to spend. If I had one wish, I'd want forever back again, to look into your eyes and hold you when you cry, It's not easy to say goodbye. I remember all those great times we had. So many memories, some good, some bad. Yes, and through it all, those memories will last forever. There's peace in where you are, maybe all I need to know. And if I listen to my heart, I'll hear your laughter once more. And so I have to say, I'm just glad you came my way. It's not easy to say goodbye.
Thank you for being here. When I first wrote my speech, I turned it in and it had too much about the grandkids. The girls said no. And it had too much about the kids, and the girls said no. They said, you are supposed to talk about Nathan as a husband. So I'm going to cheat. I have a stand. And for 11 things that I love about Nathan, I'm going to light a candle and put one for each of the 11 grandkids to remember him by. When Elliot was little, he came over and stayed overnight the first time, and he was scared of the dark. And he started to cry, and Savannah went around and collected a whole bunch of these and put him down the hall, through the kitchen, across the living room to Amo and Papa's bedroom. She said, there, now you can find Papa. There's a light for each one of you to remember how to walk, to find Papa. So, my story is a love story. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. That was on the beginning of one of the cards Nate wrote me. And some of what he wrote in the list was for me and not yours at all. This is an Easter skirt I'm wearing because toward the end, Nathan said he wanted us to celebrate. He didn't want us to be sad. How could he ask that? But celebrating, there's lots to do. So I'm wearing my Easter skirt because this is what I wore when I had Easter eggs for the kids, and he called it my Easter skirt. This is a love story on how to live, and I hope each of you get the chance to have a love story like mine. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, with feelings out of sight. Nate's love was unconditional and unselfish. I first fell in love with him by watching the way he treated Kim and Karen and Eric. Totally unselfish, unconditional love. You were everything to him. And that soon translated into Shandy and Chelsea, too, once he won their trust and friendship. One of the first dates we went on, I wouldn't have done it if it wouldn't have been Nate bribing me and a chance to ski. But we took all 5 kids skiing. They were little. And I remember coming down the ski hill and getting in line, and there were all these little voices. My boots are too tight. That run was boring. I'm hungry. Mom, I lost my mitten, and it's clear up the hill. I remember Bonnie Cafferkey, after our wedding at the reception, the videographer, took videos of people giving us their good wishes and their admonitions. Where are you, Bonnie? She had this great big straw hat on, these gorgeous big blue eyes, and she said, "Have fun on your honeymoon, you two. And when you get back, good luck with all those kids." They turned out to be the best part of my life, next to Nathan. When I was standing there in line with the girls, I wondered where Nate was, and I looked across 3 lines, and there he was over there with Eric in the singles line. They were going to get on board with us because there were too many of us to get on all at once. He caught my eye, flashed that handsome smile, and blew me a kiss. That behavior became a trademark for our marriage. When I laughed, when I cried, when I wondered, Nathan would catch my eye, wink, smile his gorgeous smile, and blow a kiss. "You're always on my radar," he said. It was his unselfish love that sealed me in his love forever. One morning he called from the office. "What are you doing?" "Brushing my teeth." "I was just imagining you, and I wanted to hear your voice." I was on his radar again, and I loved it. Sometimes he would gush a bit in front of the kids, and I'd hear things like, "Dad, stop," or "Oh, brother." But it was good to be a family in love. Candle number 2, the poem continues. How do I love thee for the ends of being and ideal grace? Kim and I were talking late one night lately, and she told me she recounted mischief in a couple of teenage decisions she made that were maybe not in the smart category. But in telling, she observed that even if Dad was disappointed in me, he never treated me with disrespect or yelled at me. I always knew he treasured me completely and valued me completely. That was Nate. Nate lived with wisdom and grace. I agreed with Kim. In 33 years of marriage, 33 years of friendship, we would have heated discussions. I made my share of mistakes, but Nate also always treated me with the greatest of respect and unconditional love. How rare is that? Yet he wasn't a wimp. In a family struggle once, his words of advice were clear. Dee Dee, when you live in a broken world, set boundaries on the bad stuff. But when you're confronted with brokenness, set the boundary and then forgive as quick as you can. Holding anger and hurt only hurts you. Then find a way to love again as quickly as possible. Nathan and I had a beautiful blended family, but I give him so much credit for that. Candle number 3, to the level of every day's most quiet need by sunlight and candlelight. I loved the presence of Nathan, just sitting by him, harmonizing under his massive voice. He would belt it out in church, and I could harmonize all I want, and people didn't hear me a bit. I liked to read by him on the couch. I liked to be the taste tester for his fudge or ice cream. He could make anything competitive but fun. He could spin a quarter for the longest he'd see who could spin a quarter for the longest time on our wooden floor, and all the kids around him. I knew that wherever Nate was my favorite place to be. Candle 4, Nathan was programmed to make memories. He always said he didn't understand why people didn't make memories, didn't make it important. He approached memory making like he did everything else, with intention, purpose, and finesse. Can you tell I liked his style? Our honeymoon was so much fun, and after we argued about who got to plan our anniversary the next year, right at the beginning we agreed to alternate annually and take turns doing the planning. We both loved making memories. I remember an Italian candlelight supper overlooking the Colosseum and ruins in Rome. I wore this skirt. The room we found on the 3rd floor overlooking Trevi Fountain. He knew how to do it. But the treasure times weren't all fancy. I remember a hike in the dark and picnic under the stars on Blue Mountain with a valley of city lights below, and wild donkeys braying, for those of you who know the canyon. Delightful. I remember peanut butter sandwiches at the top of several over 10,000-foot peaks getting ready for a trek in Nepal with Dick and Patty. One of my favorite memories was a gourmet dinner on a picnic table on a sunset beach in Cozumel with Marlows and Brodersons. It was all of our anniversaries, but it was my turn to plan. So I went to the resort next door and asked if they'd do a dinner for us on the beach. Yes, they said. They surrounded our table with rose petals in a heart shape and hung strands of lights for ambiance, with the amazing Caribbean sunset followed by the moon and twinkling candlelight and water lapping on the beach in our dive dock. I was filled with wonder. But the best part of me was always looking across the table and seeing that great smile and that great kiss along with great conversation. My hand in his, that amazing soft smile followed by a wink and a kiss. I recall that in a million times and places. They've imprinted my heart. Candle number 5, Nate's intellect made our marriage rich. He could talk philosophy, politics, religion, psychology, sports, history with the best of them. You could pick a topic and he was engaging. He was articulate, clever, and had an amazing demand of language. Can you tell I was a little in awe of this guy? I loved to watch him, and sometimes he'd catch my eye watching and get a twinkle in his eye. He liked that. I knew I was on his radar. Candle 6, Nate's intellect was also a fun part of our romantic life. As has been mentioned, Nate grew up with a single mom who worked nights but still read poetry and classics to her kids every evening. Without a doubt, those early readings I found infused with love notes and cards Nate wrote to me. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. And he'd go on. He could list some doozies that even made me blush. Or, I will love thee as long as a man can breathe or my eyes can see. He was amazing. Those are 2 kosher samples for inquisitive minds. The rest are mine, hidden in a box. I will dig them out and read and reread them on quiet evenings that are too quiet. Candle number 7, living with gratitude, was Nate's chosen way to live. I remember him quoting from Beatty, gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos into order, confusion into clarity, a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. One morning while lying weak on the couch, Nate said, I've been thinking, and his smile spread. I've realized I'm certainly the luckiest of men. To have you for my girlfriend for 33 years, to have 5 talented, amazing kids who are God-centered and doing their part to make the world a better place, plus 11 brilliant, wonderful grandkids to share my life with. For what more could I ask? I've already lived more than most men. Nathan found joy in choosing to live with gratitude. I love thee freely, the poem continues. Nate knew love was freely given. He admired me as a woman, among other things. In fact, Nathan was a favorite with many of my girlfriends because of the respect and the way he would listen carefully. He truly respected women. That quality was such a gift to our own girls. It's a respect for the other that makes relationships thrive. My love and friendship he longed for, but he respected that it was mine to give. 9, Nathan was a man who strived for what was right. He was a debater who believed truth mattered. Here are a few comments that have come in from colleagues on cards and emails over the last few days. Here comes the competitive side. We mopped the floor with them, but it was Nate who did the most heavy lifting. Another. He was a cheerful warrior for things that mattered. Another. I was blown away by his clarity, eloquence, and geniality. But it was the power of his argument that most impressed me. And another. Though he was well able to argue positions, he was in no way an ideologue or extremist. He left me wishing to converse more. This is one of my favorites since I like this age group. But Nathan helped teach a class on medicine and the law for medical students. I love this comment. Mr. Schilt was my culture warrior and hero. Who knew his reach? The poem goes on, I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I once asked Nathan why he was so humble. His comment was telling, God only knows how stupid I can be. I can't do it all, so here on earth, the only ones I care about thinking me brilliant are you and the kids. When the kids asked him a question once, they treated him like an encyclopedia. He gave a deep answer, and I turned to him after, sidled up to him and said, is that really all true? And he goes, for me to know and you to wonder. I love how Nate ordered his priorities. Candle number 11, I love thee with a passion put to use. Music was one of Nathan's passions. He studied with an Italian master called Tavoloni, so did Anita. For him, it was therapy. Even if I didn't know he had a lesson, I could tell when he walked in the room because he enunciated differently and his step was lighter. We saw Phantom of the Opera 3 times while we were dating, and Anita sang part of it for our wedding. The Disney Center was becoming an annual Christmas treat with Chelsea and Marcus. We never missed one of Micklin Lepang's local concerts. Nathan believed Micklin was a child prodigy and supported his career development. Micklin is now located in Vienna and plays with major symphonies all over the world. Nate sang to me at our wedding and even talked me into singing with him, which on the tape you can hardly hear, but oh well. But one of my most favorite stories comes from a trek on the Annapurna Trail with Dick and Patty, Richard and Patty Catalano. One day, our Sherpa was trekking along in flip-flops, smoking pot. He broke into "Oh Danny Boy" in Nepalese. With the Annapurna Glacier crashing on one side and the hum of monks chanting from cells on the other, Nate joined his sweet and powerful voice with the Sherpa in a round of "Oh Danny Boy." One sang in Nepalese, one in English. My heart almost stopped at the memory. It was magic. Nate lived with passion. I love thee with a passion put to use, the poem says. I was always proud of his big heart, how his life pushed back on darkness, and how he always fought with a passion for what was beautiful and what was good. He had a passion to make the world a better place. We were polar opposites in many ways, but a perfect team. After I retired, I found causes I was passionate about, and he would get inspired and support my involvement and the causes. I'd get inspired, but he was my anchor. Here are just a few of his most recent passions that we love to be a part of. Inspire Life Skills. It's a Riverside Christian not-for-profit developed for former foster youth who have aged out of the system and have nowhere to go and no support. Youth Hope in Redlands is another Christian-based not-for-profit for kids who were on their own and had no family support. Some of those kids are here tonight. I spotted you. I developed programming that seemed to address what I thought, as a mom, their age group would need. Then with the backing of Nathan and our Gathering Place Sabbath School and others, we offered scholarship, housing, and support systems to help the kids get on their feet. We had 2 houses for 18 to 22-year-olds for about 10 years. Then there was Hannah's House for single moms and the garden and teaching center we built. Those were local. Internationally, Nathan loved Frontier Missions. In lieu of flowers, he asked me to put, those are good things for you to donate to. Our niece Mandy, completed service with Frontier Missions in Laos for 2 years. She found it life-changing for her as well as those she served. Most of the kids in the houses didn't believe in God. They said they prayed and God never showed up. But there was one unusual girl one time who coined the term for me, that was a God sighting. It became part of Nate's and my vocabulary. She said for her, Nate was a God sighting. I so got that. Someone who listens and shows up when God needs them. I love that. To see God sightings, you just have to pay attention, she said. Nathan and I made it a regular practice to try to pay attention better. While I am eternally grateful for all the care and support of all of you out there, I see people I could go on and on and on and thank for helping me in the last 3 years. Patty, are you here, Patty? She was going to come. She's going to be bashful and not raise her hand. Ah, I see. Patty was one of my favorite stories because it exemplified Nate's philosophy of living on things. Living. Patty's a beautiful, talented Hispanic girl who utilized the scholarship houses and went on to become a teller in a local Redlands bank. She now has a beautiful little daughter called Divine, who would come over and give Nate hugs and call him Papa. As cancer progressed, Nate lost a lot of weight, and a warm bath was a big comfort. One hard night, Nate had a silent seizure and lost cognition. I couldn't get him out of the tub. That night, none of my family were near, so I called Patty and said, "Patty, can you send Philip over?" Her big, strong, muscly Philip came over and gently lifted Nate out of the bathtub. I dried him off, we put him to bed, and I called Dr. Gina Moore, who is a saint of a palliative care doctor, followed her directions, and when it was finally all okay, Philip put his arm on my shoulder, my tired shoulders, and said, "Just so you know, Patty and I are always here for you. We're always glad to be backup family when you need it." Nate often said, "We're all given our own unique resources to share, and what makes life happiest is sharing those in an interdependent way." Nate gave Patty a hand up when she needed it, and Philip gave Nathan and I a hand up when we needed it. That was the way Nathan loved to live. He was my partner in watching for God sightings. In my old griefs and with my childhood faith, in the Greek version of the story of Jesus and Lazarus, it states that Jesus' body quaked with anger and grief over what death had been allowed to do to his friend Lazarus, even when he knew he was going to raise him from the dead. And then he simply put his arm around Mary and wept. I love that. Jesus knows how angry I feel over what has happened with Nathan, and I'm sure he understands my frustration about not being able to stop it. I'm sure he weeps beside me, but I also know the ending to that story. The historical fact that a stone was rolled away, and of a Jesus who I trust to write our next chapter. That's my childhood faith. It's what grounds you when the world goes upside down. Nathan believed that too. Common faith was probably one of the foundational elements that made Nate's and my marriage work. Nate was a spiritual leader for our family. One morning a couple of months ago, he and I were really having a rough morning. Sorry to tell these. Nathan refused breakfast and was lying on the sofa, and even with narcotics on board, he was calling it a 6 and 7 pain level. His eyes were closed, and I sat at the table trying to swallow my breakfast, uncontrollable tears raging down my cheeks. Why couldn't I do something? It was unbearable watching him suffer. And then in that frigid moment, it must have been a case of his radar again. He opened his eyes, looked for me, and on catching my eye, flashed that incredible smile, the wink, and the kiss. Then in his best husband-sounding voice, he said, "Sweetheart, we have today. We're going to watch for God sightings, and we're going to make a memory. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. If God so choose, I will love thee even better in the next." Thank you for being here.
Dee Dee and all the rest of Nate's family, it is truly a sacred privilege to have the opportunity to say something on behalf of someone for whom I had such admiration and affection. I've been thinking a lot about Nate these days, about Anita's and my and our kiddos' early days at LLUC, many conversations that took place right after church down here, evenings with Nate and Dee Dee and Carrie and Judy and children and other friends, camping by the river, mammoth trips, going out with Nate. I'm not sure what the rest were doing, but it was a Saturday night and it was NFL football playoff season, and Nate and I went down to a sports bar and watched the game. We had a wonderful evening, just talking and somewhat cheering. An anointing, Dee Dee, at your house, surrounded by family, filled with prayer and an admiration of Nate's gracious and grace-filled perspective on what life had dealt him. Many memories. I got to thinking that those of us gathered here this afternoon come from different facets of Nate's life. So I'm going to ask if you would do me a favor. I realize there will be overlap, and some of these may not apply to you. I don't know everyone, and more than one may apply to you. But I'm going to ask if you knew Nate, and if maybe one of your primary ways of knowing him was in one of these areas, would you stand and allow Dee Dee to turn around in her pew and see who's here? So if you knew Nate in school, elementary, secondary, college, law school, whatever it was, would you stand? Beautiful. Thank you so much. You may be seated. If you knew Nate in his professional world, his practice of law, or any of those professional tentacles, would you stand? Wow, look at that. These are his colleagues, Dee Dee. You may be seated. If you knew Nate at church, either LLUC or Crosswalk, would you stand? Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. You may be seated. What about Gathering Place Sabbath School? Now, there's a distinct possibility that some of them, Dee Dee, may be in that room behind me. So we'll see if they're here. Gathering Place Sabbath School. Beautiful. Oh, wow. A lot. Precious friends of Nate's and Dee Dee's. What about sports? Ping pong, golf, whatever it was, or games, word games, and the like. Wow, more than I would have expected. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And then through Nate's and Dee Dee's service projects, about which you've just heard, if you were part of that or touched by that, would you stand? Beautiful again. Thank you so much. And the last one, and I am standing for this one. If you would say of Nate, he was my personal friend, would you stand? Wow. Thank you. So we're drawn here by this man, remarkable man, that we loved, that enriched our lives, deepened our faith walk, When I had the privilege and the opportunity to talk with Dee Dee and with Karen a little bit about this service, Karen, when I asked about, is there a passage that's meaningful, one that might be an important passage to have as the foundation of what we talk about, Karen offered a passage that I love. I've been asked many times to share, but never, to my recollection, at a memorial service. 1 Corinthians 13. Many times when couples have stars in their eyes and love in their hearts and they're planning a wedding, this is a passage. I've pondered that a lot, Karen, since that day, just thinking about it. And it has struck me that there are many ways we might measure a person's life. We might measure their life by how long they lived. We might measure their life by that to which they gave themselves. We might measure their lives by how they treated others, how much we will miss them, how their life ended. We might measure their lives in many ways. But 1 Corinthians 13 gives us the way I think God measures our lives. Because the chapter is divided into 3 sections, just 3 simple ways by which I think God measures human life and thus Nate's life. First, a life is measured not by giftedness, but by love. If I speak in the tongues of humans or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. A life is measured not in giftedness, but in love. We have heard, and correctly so, what a gifted human being Nate was. His gifts spanned many different areas, interests, and disciplines. His gift touched all of us in different ways. But when it comes to the bottom line, God, through the pen of the Apostle Paul, says, the way I truly measure a life is not by its giftedness, but by its love. And I'm glad for that. I'm glad because I happen to live in a community that is filled with gifted people. It's a community in which one can easily say, wow, I simply don't have what he has or she has or that person has. But at the end of the day, God says, how well have you loved? How deeply have you loved? How much have you given? And because of that, I think it is apropos to celebrate Nate's life here today, because Nate loved deeply, he loved throughout his life, and he loved well, Dee Dee. A life is not measured by its giftedness in the eyes of God, but by its love. Secondly, a life is not measured in what we say, but in what we do. Not in what we say, but in what we do. Paul continues, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. It's curious that when Paul is giving us a description of what love is, almost as if in answer to the question, Paul, show me what love looks like. Paint me a picture. Give me a portrait. I need to be able to see it in my mind's eye. This is what Paul does. And he talks not in ethereal terms, white fluffy clouds, candy canes. None of that. Paul talks about how we live, what we do, the actions in which we engage. Because that's the reality of love. It is active, it moves. Dee Dee says she fell in love with Nate first for the way he treated his own and other kids. I told Dee Dee when Doug and I had the privilege of sitting with her a week or two ago that I think it's a testament to Nate and to Dee Dee that I look at the adult kids, those who have spoken today, who have sung today, and I cannot remember who belongs to who. They're just all family. And Dee Dee says, I fell in love with him when I saw how he treated the kids. That's the reality of love. That's one of the best ways to measure love. In fact, my colleague Doug May said Nate was a father to more than his own. Through scholarship houses and many other ways, Nate's love was active. It had no doubt, we've heard it, it's been beautiful. Its romantic side, its passionate side, its joyful side. But make no mistake about it, it was not a mere emotion. It was active. And that must be underlined because in Scripture, through the words of Paul, we see that a life is measured not in what we say, but in what we do. And then there's the third paragraph of 1 Corinthians 13, which I think tells us a life is measured. A life is truly measured, not in time, but in eternity. Love never fails, Paul writes, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. It's quite striking that in a chapter where Paul is talking about this greatest of the Christian virtues, this greatest of the Christian gifts, this thing called agape, called love, that he ends talking not just about time, but about eternity. Throughout the earlier part of the chapter, he has talked about how we live love out in the here and now. The fact that all the giftedness that one may have will never be a substitute for love. That all the words that we may speak will never take the place of active love. And yet he will not close the chapter without turning his mind, without turning his sight toward eternity. A key part of what Paul says here, Dee Dee, is that we will never, not here and not there, we will never outgrow our need for love. Never. It will only be in the presence of God that we will know love for what it truly is. It is only there that we will realize that the profound realities which we have heard today, so beautiful and so real, all along were merely a foretaste of what is to come. We see it dimly now. We will live in its splendor then. We will never outgrow our need for love. But it's not only that Paul promises. Because of the love of God, because of the love which God has for us, because of the grace with which he grips us. Paul says in this passage that will be a day when what is only dimly understood now will deeply be understood then. when so much that makes no sense now will be answered then. That in the presence of God, what has been dimly reflected in a mirror will be brought out to the blazing light of God's Son. It's a wonderful promise to think that in these days and in these moments when we wrestle with deep and profound questions, that we do so in the context of a God of this kind of love. In the context of a God who promises that, as Jesus said to Peter, you may not understand what I do now, but you will understand one day. And all of that will be done in the context of love. In fact, Paul pairing love with eternity in this context tells us that God's true measure of a man, of a woman, will happen not here but there. When we will have the privilege of understanding that our sometimes feeble, sometimes faulty, oftentimes flawed attempts at love have had an eternal impact. I yearn for that day. I yearn for the day when Jesus, as he did with Lazarus, as Dee Dee shared, fractures every tomb, calls forth every friend, and allows us the privilege to see life from his perspective. And will allow Nate to see the true measure of a humble life well lived. Karen, I love your choice of a passage because it tells us that a life is measured not in giftedness, but in love. A life is measured not in what we say, but in what we do. A life is measured not in time, but in eternity. Knowing Nathan Schilt, having the privilege of having called him friend, by the grace of God and the goodness of Jesus, Nate measures up extremely well.
So weary when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and waiting in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. Stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. I can be.
I have appreciated so much being here today. I have appreciated every word spoken in reflection of Nate. I feel like I've been with him. It's been good. Let's pray. Loving Heavenly Father, the giver of all good things, thank you for giving us Nate. Thank you for the time that we've had with him and the good and the love he represented in our lives. You never promised that life would not hurt, but you promised that you would be with us through life. We ask that you would be with Dee Dee and her precious family as they make their way forward. May they receive the love this community has for them. Lord, you have promised us good things, like Nate, in our lives for a season, like your presence in our lives as we suffer change, and like a glorious reunion, not only with our precious brother, Nate, who believed in you, but also, Lord, a reunion with you, our Savior, who also lived and died and was raised again and made our hope complete, the same hope in which Nate took comfort. Dear Lord, thank you for Nate and his family in our lives. Thank you for the hope your resurrection promises. We long for that great reunion. Make us strong and faithful until that day. Amen. If we could ask that you delay for just a moment while the family can recess to the fellowship hall. Thank you for coming today.